Welcome to Big Softies. I'm Gavin Adam, the host, and I'm the CTO of James Chase and of Hodfords, where we combine the worlds of offshoring with local talent to be able to deliver projects on time, every time. Today, I'm joined by Danny Hope, who is an expert in UX and the founder and curator of UX Brighton. Welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Right. Okay, so, Danny, let's start off with some warm-up stuff, right? So in terms of, you've been doing this a little while now. What got you into the field of UX in the first place?
Oh, I've always taken I've always had the mindset, the sort of UX mindset, I suppose, the disposition, and then I was just lucky that it turns out, like ever since I was a child, I've had that kind of. I encounter something that doesn't work, I want to fix it. I want to find a better way for this can opener to work. And I can even remember my mum saying to me as a child, like, "Oh, when you can do better, then you can criticize it." And it's almost as though I've built my entire career around getting myself into a position where I can legitimately criticize things. But that's a kind of trivializing it a little bit, but I've always been really interested in making things work well for people, and there wasn't a name for that I knew of when I was a little kid, but it turns out that was called usability. Then it was called information architecture and interaction design, and then it was called UX, and maybe it's going to be called something different. But I've always had the UX disposition. And I think user experience or user-centered design is really a disposition. It's not an industry. It's not a skill. It's a disposition. I guess that's how I got into it. It got into me.
So I remember being suggested to read The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman.
Of course,
Is it Don Norman?
Yeah. Don Norman, yeah.
Don Norman, yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at it and going, oh, that kind of makes sense. Is that something that resonates?
Oh yeah. That was a great book. There's a few books. There's The Design of Everyday Things. That was very influential, as I think most UX people of my sort of age would agree with. The less known one that I think it was even more influential on me was The Humane Interface, which was written by Jeff Raskin.
Right. We often have worked on projects, both of us I know in the past, where talk about accessibility needs and just go, can you read? If you can read, then you can do this. And oh no, you can't, because people don't read. Just because they can doesn't mean they do. And it doesn't matter how much you put something in bold or big type.
Oh yeah. You hear this all the time, and so we'll try and connect this back to we'll go back to the humane interface and the design of everyday things, but I'll try and connect it up. But people don't. I was at work today. It's a converted bank, and people still arrive at the door trying to deposit money. It's not a bank anymore; it's a co-working space. And people are like, why don't you just put up a sign that says it's not a bank anymore? It's like, well, you think people read everything that is all the words that they confront every day? Like you wouldn't get 100 yards along the road, because there's just too many things that you would read if that's how the human brain worked. You don't. You select. You have what used to be called banner blindness. You selectively disregard certain things, and you prioritize other things to put your attention on. And just because something is written somewhere doesn't mean people are going to read it, as you're saying.
Yeah, although I get that, and I suppose that's where I have a challenge, is because I find it so much easier to read something than to listen to something. And I can skim read something in a flash, and I tend to, whereas it seems that most people don't.
Oh no, I think everyone skim reads to some extent. When it's a task centric situation. So if it's a novel, no one skim reads. But if it's living your life and not specifically sitting down to read for the fun of the story or whatever, and everyone skim reads, which is to say everyone uses their hierarchy of values to select things in the world to attend to.
Yeah.
That's like skim reading is just a subset of that, right? Because your eyes take in, what is it, like 20 megabytes of data per every 25th of a second, or what, I don't know what the numbers are, but your eye takes in way too much information for you to attend to. You'd be there for a whole day looking at 1 second's worth of input.
Yeah.
If you didn't have a way of prioritizing what you should attend to. And so when you're walking down the street and, something flashes past your eye, a leaf goes past your eye, you're gonna be momentarily startled by that leaf. Just, you didn't plan it, but you prioritize that attendance, just because moving things are more useful, evolutionarily speaking, to attend to than not moving things. And so I think scan reading is just a subset of that. And I think it's completely natural. And I think everyone does it.
I had a really, really interesting conversation with someone yesterday, slightly tangential, but slightly connected, where he has a child who's got very complex learning needs. And he was working, this chap was working with a professor from Barcelona who's been doing an incredible study on blind people, where they were using touch to learn, and they had their hands on sensors, and it had essentially a plus and a minus, and there were various inputs. And what they did is that this guy had essentially a EEG monitor on their head to see which parts of the brain were lighting up at which particular times. And after about between 3 and 6 months of continuous training using this, the neuroplasticity in the brain fired up new pathways which connected to the visual cortex. So essentially, the brain was interpreting touch as vision. It understood, and it was then using essentially Google Glasses. So if you saw a bottle, it was giving the user touch of a bottle, but it was looking in the brain as if it was a bottle of a sighted person.
So the visual part of the brain was there, and it was being almost like repurposed. Like, here's a different stream of data that might suit what a visual cortex or whatever it's called is good at. Now use it for that. Yeah, that's crazy.
It was really, really interesting. This particular neuroscientist was, I don't speak Spanish, but it's apparently a very lauded article in, South America.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that some of the first like the earliest neuroscience was done in Spain, I believe. But yeah, that's. I remember hearing, I think it was Richard Feynman talking about. Imagine you're in a swimming pool, and you've got your fingers on the surface of the water, and somewhere over in the other corner of the swimming pool, there's a little thing moving the water up and down. It's interacting with the water in a certain way, and you can feel those waves. But then, and so you can detect that there's a thing moving in a certain way over there because I can feel the waves are moving in a certain way. But then imagine there's like hundreds of things all interacting with it, and now you've got this like hugely complex input that your fingers how can you possibly tell what's going on? But it's like, well, that's what vision is. Yeah, vision's just all these waves coming in,
and you trying to filter it out.
And you're able to, and that's amazing.
So, obviously, you've done how long have you been in the world of UX?
So, I guess, I suppose if you want to go back this far, I guess 1993, 92 was when I first encountered hypertext systems. So I was a nerd at school when everyone else was out, playing football. I was in the science lab where there was a little Macintosh Classic, remember those black and white Macs, and a couple of friends and I stumbled across tool called HyperCard, which was one of the sort of two technologies that inspired Tim Berners-Lee to create the World Wide Web, as HyperCard and the Next computer. So we stumbled across HyperCard. It was almost like PowerPoint in that it was like a series of screens. Like you'd have this stack of screens, and you could put buttons on there. There was scripting that was parallel with JavaScript, I suppose, and you had buttons and text areas, and there was a certain amount of dynamism. But it was very easy to build hypertext systems using this classic tool. And then when it was time to go to university, I kind of skipped that, went straight into my first design job in I guess 1996, 97. And I had this kind of I had this dream of being an artist, and so I went to all these design companies and said, "Hi, hey, I want to be I want to be a designer because it's the nearest thing to being an artist that there is. So I want to be a print designer, basically." But so here's my portfolio of paintings and all this kid stuff. And by the way, I know how to do this hypertext thing, and so they were like, "Well, your paintings are well, let's leave those to one side. But this hypertext thing, you've done this, and we want to sell websites to people now. It's 1997. Everyone wants a digital brochure. So I
the world of Web 1.0.
Web 1.0, absolutely, and it certainly wasn't called UX. I didn't even know the word usability back then. I guess there was user friendliness we would talk about. And I kind of felt like I was just a second-rate visual designer, but actually I was like really good at figuring out what would work for people, and I was reasonably good at trying to figure out what value does this provide as well. So that was the 90s, and it wasn't called UX, and I wasn't doing user testing, so it's a bit of a stretch to say I was like a UX person back in the 90s, but I definitely had that disposition. I was much more into how things work and trying to make them feel really nice to use over making them very de rigueur, very fashionable from a visual design point of view. So I guess I got into the industry through this strange avenue of art and hypertext, but then I guess I was lucky I stumbled into a job making websites for museums, which taught me all about accessibility way back in 2001, I suppose. So I've always since then taken this kind of accessibility approach to building things. And then in about 2003, 2004, we started doing usability testing on the stuff that we were kicking out. And I guess that's how I got into it. I think back in if you're in your 40s now and you're a UXer, you probably got in through a myriad of different routes.
Well, it didn't exist back then, let's be honest.
It didn't exist, and but there were things like computer science existed, data analysis was a thing, library science was a thing, psychology, all these very valid routes in were kind of how people got into the industry then.
You mentioned accessibility, and I've found, particularly dealing with challenging stakeholders, should we say, that's often disregarded. It's we don't have to worry about it. Everyone's sighted. Everyone has this. And people's understanding of accessibility seems to be it sort of coalesces around this is what we think people or who our users are. They don't seem to understand that accessibility needs could be anything from cognitive challenges and the way people do sensory processing, be it text, audio, visual, whatever, color blindness, right through to people who have got complex learning needs. Mm-hmm. And I've certainly been made to feel like a prat in the past when I've actually seen people use systems which I've been responsible for, and they've been less than stellar in their accessibility. How do you think people now realize that perhaps things like WGAC or WA, what is it?
Yeah. WCAG.
WCAG. Does WCAG actually provide people with an incentive, or is it still just a stick that people get beaten with?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, anything where the spirit gets turned into the letter eventually will get used as a stick to beat people with by kind of by some people. But WCAG's a good thing. It's maybe a little bit lengthy and a bit hard, a bit cumbersome at times, but like coming up through the accessibility, like being sort of raised with it, I thought it was so normal, and I regarded it as like just that's how you do things properly. I remember someone back in like 2006 saying like, "Oh, we don't care about accessibility. We just do things properly." And there's some truth to that. If you do things properly, then it sort of will be accessible at a code level. But in any case, that idea that it was just a given that you would do things in an accessible way, and there'd be all these like side benefits, like your websites would also be accessed by search engines, and those search engines would be able to understand the content of your page because of how you'd marked it up and so forth. And I remember years and years of doing that kind of work, and everyone around me was totally into the same stuff as well, had the same sort of values when it came to making sure that anyone could use the thing. And then I went into a marketing company, and it was like, oh wow, all these battles that I've heard people saying they have to fight around accessibility, around trying to convince people of its value, I'm suddenly having to fight those battles. And I was like, I was shocked. I really thought it was like the norm now, and you would be terribly disrespected if you didn't uphold that norm. But it turns out there's plenty of companies that say, well, they say things like, well, none of our users are blind. And it's like, okay, there's so many misunderstandings that have gone into that statement. But but someone like me finds it much easier to. So I read a Nielsen Norman report back in the day about accessibility. And one of the first things it said was, it's kind of better to think about it from the point of view of usability, and we've got to make the website usable by who? Anybody. Okay, so, and that's sort of what accessibility is, but it kind of goes beyond accessibility. Accessibility is kind of slightly limited in its scope, but I think usability is like got a broader scope. It's not just can they access it, it's can they use it. And that's of course like accessing something is part of using it. So I've always framed it in my mind. I've always framed it as like, we've got to make this usable by everybody. So therefore you need mechanisms in your process by which you can validate that the thing you've made can be, that it is usable by everybody. And so, but it's easier said than done. Like, I can remember many times trying to recruit usability test participants who were both in our audience and had severe disabilities of one kind or another, to make sure that it was usable by them, and almost impossible to get someone who's got physical needs or cognitive needs or sensory needs or the rest of it, and who's part of your demographic. So you kind of you can't do it perfectly, but
I guess there are plenty of tools out there now that do try and replicate some of those needs.
There are some tools out there, and I would certainly use them rather than not use them. They don't go far enough. They don't, you still do have to test with real people and that. But if you can incorporate into your tool chain something that every time you deploy, it gives you essentially an audit of your technical accessibility, the stuff that the machine can detect. That's a good thing to do. One thing I've also seen done is people will establish a persona. They'll say like, oh, let's have an accessibility persona, where we've got like one user type who's got all of the accessibility needs. That seems like a really that doesn't seem to match reality at all. You don't have that, and it seems like a really strange way to do it. I can't quite put into words why I feel that way, but But I think, like, in the same way that you would involve QA in the sort of deployment process, it's good to include those accessibility tools in the deployment process. So every time we publish the UX Brighton website, we automatically get a Lighthouse report. Literally every edit on the website updates our Lighthouse report. Lighthouse is a Google accessibility checking tool. It checks a whole bunch of other stuff as well, I think. But and we use it to some extent, and we try and be good. We've got, we're in the sort of the 90s, 90% kind of range, so we're doing okay. But
I suppose there are certain. We first met working in the context of public sector work, where it's very prescribed in terms of what you can and can't do, and standards that need to be adhered to and maintained. And I actually found that an incredibly valuable exercise. I've been quite stunned by how, whilst it's been embraced by some countries, some organisations, yes, some enterprises, you name it, as being actually, that's kind of the right way to do things. I've also seen some incredible exemplars of how not to do it, where a number of times, even recently, I remember going onto, I think it was a visa application site for the US for my eldest son, and I felt really challenged and stupid. So I'm meant to be digitally savvy, I'm doing. Hell, I'm a CTO. It's if I can't do it, what the hell?
That could be your problem though. Like if you're anything like me, so there's certain things like government forms, maybe like banking things, a few other kind of formal things that are very important to do. I have to get my partner, who's like less digitally savvy than I am, to do them, because I can't get through these forms because, A, I take them literally, and that's like a psychological problem. But B, I get hung up on design flaws. I'm like, come and look at this. Look at what they've laid this out like this, and they caused this ambiguity, and now I can't tell whether I'm supposed to answer this way or that way. And either way, and I get totally hung up on these design details, and I just can't move past them.
Is this the point where you then start screenshotting it, putting it onto a Notion page, and then sharing it with the people who are responsible for it?
Yeah. Well, there's just not enough bandwidth for all these screenshots. If I started doing that, there's not enough hours in the day. But she'll come along and she'll go, "You're obviously meant to click this," and I'm like, "I don't know, it's ambiguous." And she'll just like get through. She'll like, "Do you want me to do it for you?" I was like, "Yeah, I think you better."
I'd love to be able to think that was the problem, but honestly, some of the things, particularly that US visa thing, the ESTA thing, it's just like,
it's just genuinely badly
this is
put
so
together.
poor.
Yeah. Okay.
Does anyone ever want to visit your country?
Yeah. Well, maybe it falls into the class of problem of, if we don't fix this, actually we make more money than if we do fix it. I don't know. That might be a bad example, but there are definitely websites that you go to or apps, or any system where there's a bug and it's stopping you from doing something important, like, I don't know, getting your money back for something, let's say, and they know about the bug, and then internally they have a meeting of like, right, okay, we've got 100 bugs, what are we going to fix? Well, why don't we spread them out on how much effort it is to fix versus how much money it will make us if we fix it, kind of matrix. And then there's some bugs, like the bug that's there when I try and get my money back from a service. It's like, well, okay, how much money is this going to make us if we fix it? Well, actually, we'll lose money if we fix it.
Don't fix it.
Okay, put that near the bottom of the chart then. And how much effort would it take to fix it? Well, quite a lot. It's like, okay, well, that's never going to get done then. And it's not like they deliberately introduced the bug, but now it's there. It's not going to, it's not going to.
So let me get this right. You're blaming product managers.
I'm saying there are selection biases, maybe that mean certain things, while not deliberately introduced, don't get fixed. And I don't know. It's a hype. It's a theory. It's a theory.
What would you say would be the most valuable lesson you've ever sort of had, or you could impart and think people should know about the world of UX?
That's a hard one. The most valuable lesson ever.
Well, I suppose let's spin it slightly differently. If there's a core skill that you think is
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's easier to answer. Well, two things spring to mind. So, empathy is the skill that you kind of have to say empathy.
right,
That's number one, and that's true to an extent, but I think it gets too much coverage. I think if we were empathic, we wouldn't need methods like usability testing, because we already know what people think about things, right? That's what empathy is. Like, I feel the same way you do about this interface. Well, we know we're not really empathetic, because we ought not to trust the idea that we're empathetic. We ought to assume that we've got no empathy for the user, which is why we have to do things like usability testing. So I do think, the more you can empathize with the user, the better. But I think that the skill that is often not talked about is I guess what would you analytic? What's the word? Being able to take an analytic approach to things, being able to map a problem out, being able to draw a bunch of seemingly disparate things across two axes in order to reason about them, or to pull something into, like, to structure something as a hierarchy, or to push around the knowledge you've got into a shape that allows you to reason about it. I certainly don't think reason's the be all and end all. I think intuition's a really big thing, and some things are ineffable and hard to articulate. But reason doesn't get talked about enough, and it's a big part of what I try to do with the conference, is try and push this notion of, like, let's reason about things. There are some problems that you can solve through reason. Not everything has to be a usability test. So I think, empathy it's really nice if you are lucky enough to have buckets and buckets of empathy. In lieu of empathy, having a bunch of empathy tricks, which, like, usability testing is an empathy trick. It's like, trick yourself, have a way of getting closer to the user. Have tricks that help you get past your lack of empathy. But reason, I think, is the undervalued thing. It's almost I don't know why that is. It's as though we take it as given, but it's often it's often overlooked.
Yeah, I've certainly seen that in my time. And I suppose it depends on the scale of what you're working on, whether you've got a massive demographic that's the target market or target audience versus a very niche one. But I guess you don't necessarily... Do you always need to have large data sets in order to be able to provide some sort of correlation?
No. I mean that, like, you can obviously bring analysis to bear when you have got large data sets, but that's not always a prerequisite. It's nice to have lots of data, but you can reason about the smallest of things.
I know that you're a bit of a champion when it comes to user-centric design, but we've certainly had conversations in the past about perhaps a slightly different pattern that I'm particularly keen on, which is more goal-centered design. Do you have you changed your opinions over the years? What's your current?
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's a good question. So yeah, I mean, user-centeredness is great. I kind of feel like there was this naive period in the 2010s where it was like the user is the be all and end all. But actually, if you subject that to a slightly more rigorous analysis, it's like, well, the user wants everything that's possible and for free. I was like, okay, well, we can give them that for a few weeks until we completely run out of money, and so obviously there's more to it than user centricity. So I think product people have it right. And I know this is a slightly out of date model, but the idea if you've got like 3 overlapping circles and right in the middle is and so that would be thinking about your users, thinking about the technology, and thinking about the business. And if you're contemplating building something that doesn't tick all 3 of those boxes, or in other words, be in the center of those 3 rings, then you're probably doing something wrong. So it's got to make sense to the business, it's got to make sense to the users, it's got to be something you can build. So product. I think product people have the right mindset when it comes to situating user-centered design, and I think UXers ought to think in that way as well. But in terms of like what do you put at the center, I can remember having discussions over time of do you draw the boxes first or do you write the copy first, and then I as an interaction designer, I've always seen it as absolutely essential to be able to draw a box and to be able to write a word. So I would try and do both things concurrently. But that debate still rages. But I think it's kind of a red herring. Is it the boxes or is it the content or the container that you should consider first? I think the first thing you need to do is get a really, really clear understanding of the tasks. Like as you said, if you can construct some kind of even just a basic list of like the 3 or 4 main tasks that the person wants to do, that's the first thing that you establish, and everything else flows from that. Your quality assurance work, your design work, your research work, all the various timelines and journey maps, all that stuff, that all flows very naturally from a list of tasks, and then you can get more and more advanced about it. You can put those tasks into a hierarchy, and you can associate those tasks with things like your brand promise or your what you promise to help the customer with, and that's the big task, and then the little tasks nestled within that. And then you can even break it down further. So like, okay, within each task there's the way that we think you should click through our interface to do it, and that's the ideal way of getting through. And then there's your user testing. Well, the tasks are the input for the user testing as well, and so then anyway, this is too verbose, but you get the point. The tasks really are. I've not seen a better way of quickly getting your head around a big hairy problem than enumerating the tasks. And if I was going to advocate one method as strongly as I would advocate user testing, it would be Jerry McGovern's top task analysis. I think it's hard to explain what it is, but essentially it's a method whereby you end up with a sort of statistically rigorous list of the tasks that you should be supporting. And so I'm really into the task centered way of doing things, and I think the best single method for getting to a list of tasks is top tasks analysis. It's not. I very rarely encounter anywhere that's actually practicing that, but I try and advocate it wherever I think it's viable.
Well, this certainly is reminding me of why I like you. Finally, a UX who understands product. I guess it's rather hackneyed and even overused about how the march of design and user-centered design and beautiful interfaces and usability has been, the main champion of that was was our friends at Apple. Now that it is hopefully much more in the open and something that isn't just, well, I'm hoping that gone are the days of a system being designed and then someone just going, right, now make it look good, which is what my initial experience of usability was. For people now entering this sort of post-Apple world, let's call it, what do you think are the skills that they should be trying to hone to perfect this craft?
Well, I still think that, like, reason, logic, things like that. I think that's an absolutely critical pillar. I think the people who founded this, I keep wanting to call it it's not an industry, it's a mindset, it's a disposition or whatever. But the founders of this way of doing things, like, they all had like very, great capability with reason and logic, that kind of stuff. What should someone be learning now beyond that? Because I don't even know if you can learn that stuff, or if you've just got it, or if you're just born with it. But I suppose I would go back to the premise of the question a little bit about, hopefully we've moved past the idea that design is just like a layer of decoration on top of a thing that a developer has built. I think we've got much better at making stuff usable, but you only have to look at something new comes along and we revert back to our old ways of doing things. So like ChatGPT came along, and we've gone back to command line type interfaces. Now, I know you're expressing what you want rather than you telling the computer what to do, but it's still, you have to have the knowledge in your head about how to describe what you want. You're not twiddling a knob, you're not sliding a slider. There's no knowledge in the world that you're interacting with. You have to think of everything and then put it into that little box. I think the world has just accepted that to some extent, even the design world. It's like, oh yeah, chat interfaces are the future. And I don't think we should take that as a given at all. I don't think it's a great way of expressing yourself. I mean, it's like, don't get me wrong, I use these things all the time, but compared to what might be possible in terms of something that maybe it's got a bit of chat, but maybe it's got some other kind of modes of interaction, let's say. The chat interface is pretty crude, but we've just sort of accepted it. It's almost like there's a natural tendency, or there's the people that make the thing work, and then there's designers, and it's very natural, intuitive to say, well, designers just come along afterwards and decorate it. And as long as there's a separation between design and dev, there's always going to be that intuitive response, that slightly ignorant response of, like, that Microsoft were criticized for during, the sort of post, I guess, the start of the millennium. Microsoft were very, very guilty of that, regarding designers just decoration rather than as thinking about how things work, which is what it should really be. But so I don't think we're going to get away from that necessarily.
So do you think we've kind of gone full circle now that you've?
I don't think it's more like history repeating it. Well, yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, we've sort of gone full circle. History's repeating itself, but maybe we've fought all those battles before about, like, getting people to think that actually the designer is there to help you figure out how it should work and to prioritize user tasks and user needs and to be empathetic to what people's lives are like. So maybe because we fought all those battles, maybe it'll be quicker this time. Maybe we'll go more quickly from a text command line style interface, and so we can apply all the things we've learned much quicker now that we've learned them. So
you obviously mentioned ChatGPT, but AI in general. Suddenly, people have realized, or that it exists, have decided it means all sorts of things that perhaps it doesn't mean. How do you think this is going to play out into the world day to day that you inhabit in the realm of UX?
I saw an article recently that said it's gonna make you more capable at the same time as pushing you out. I think that's maybe a bit glib,
Mm.
but there's probably something in that. I, I come from a time when you had to do a bit of everything. You had to not maybe set up a physical server, but you had to be, you had to write Perl scripts and ASP and, do the visual design and write the theme tune and sing the theme tune and do the whole, be a full stack developer just to get your designs out into the world. And then I think maybe the government, the GDS way of doing things, where you've got a UXer, you've got a UX writer, you've got all these different roles, kind of broke that up a little bit. And I was like, I know, I became an interaction designer, just an interaction designer, and these other things kind of off limits. The research was someone else's job. But I think that was a bit of a loss in a way, because what you did is you turned you made it so people who knew how to do lots of different things had to just 90% of what they knew in order to become the specialist role. I think AI is making it possible to be a designer with a little bit of research knowledge, but actually you can be more of a competent researcher as well as being a designer now. You can, maybe you know a bit about like some business stuff, you know how to perform a SWOT analysis, but you're a designer, so who's got the time? Well, now AI is making it so you can perform a SWOT analysis more quickly. Oh, you've got all these research findings that you need to synthesize. It's like, well, AI is really good for large language models because of what they are, how they work. They're really good at clustering terms. That's what they're really good for. So I think, we think about the T-shaped skill set where you're, as I say, a designer with other abilities. Those other abilities are gonna increase. You're going to be able to be better at those other things. And so you're going to become a more, almost back to the sort of, is it Leah Bewley? She talked about the UX team of one back in the day. Well, that kind of had its day, but I think there might be a bit of a resurgence. Maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part, because I would like to use some of the coding skills and the business skills and the whatever on top of the design stuff. But I think AI, kind of gives you all these extra arms, gives you all these extra capabilities. So I think maybe it'll encourage a bit more UX generalization among practitioners. And I think that I'd actually think that's a worry, but it's also a good thing. I think innovation happens when people come up with new ideas and ways to do things. And I think with the best will in the world and with the most willing collaborators, still the best ideas happen inside your head. They don't happen in between two people in the space between. They happen in the mind of the individual while they're talking to other people. And I think if an individual can know about more concepts, have a broader design space, as it were, they can come up with more ideas. So I think encouraging people to know about more things, take responsibility for a wider range of things rather than just research or just design, I think that's a good thing for the industry, for the world, for the economy, whatever. At the same time, it's really scary, and the world's going to be a very different place, and that's never a particularly calming idea.
Yeah, I think it's an often it's dare I say it's human nature at times to be all doom and gloom because of how we're often subjected to information, because actually that tends to capture people's attention more if it's dangerous.
Well, you mean through the news and things like that?
Yeah. I seem to remember you telling me about book. Was it The Best Rangers of Our Nature?
But yes, the Steven Pinker thing.
Yes, and I remember I did read it, and actually it's a really interesting book, and I'm very glad you recommended it, because it has actually made me a lot more open to a different way of thinking and providing a different layer of analysis on these things, because it's glib and it's throwaway to say, tabloids sell. But they do.
Yeah. Then their mission isn't to distribute truth. It's to distribute like chunks of paper.
Yeah, or ad clicks or whatever it is.
Oh
these
yeah,
days.
yeah.
Um,
To get in front of eyeballs.
And I remember having quite a deep and meaningful conversation with my eldest son recently. I said, "Oh, I don't know why I'm bothering doing any of this because none of this stuff's going to work. What I was planning on doing is going to be replaced by AI." He's thinking of becoming a lawyer, and I was saying, "Well, you say that, but I think there's a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding of actually what AI means and how it functions. And the reality is that what exists today did exist from a theoretical perspective in the 70s, but there was not the computing power to actually execute it. And all really we're talking about doing is, do you remember, have you heard I'm trying to remember exactly what it's called, so I'll probably hack this apart, but it's a Chinese room. The idea.
Oh, is this the thing of like if it does all the things, if it acts like a human and walks like a human, talks like a human,
Is it human?
is it human?
To an extent, I suppose it's a
slight
slight simplification of that, which is that imagine you've got someone sitting in a room, there's two slots, there's one slot in, one slot out. He's got a big book in front of him and it's got Chinese symbols. And when he receives a note from one side, he looks at the note, sees what the symbols are, looks them up in the dictionary, writes down the corresponding instruction set,
Right.
and posts it out
Okay.
in English. Right? Now, as far as the receiver is concerned, this person is a Chinese interpreter. As far as and vice versa.
Yeah.
The reality is that the man in the middle there doesn't understand Chinese.
Yeah.
But at what point do they? I suppose. And that's kind of all you've really got is billions and billions of parameters and if then else statements. It's probabilistic outcomes. And my response personally to my teenagers, well, no, you're not going to be replaced by an AI. You're going to be replaced by someone who's using an AI.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that. It's hard to know. I think I really like the sound of, AI is good at some stuff. The computer's good at some stuff. AI is good at some stuff, and we're good at other stuff. And it's about the collaboration, and that's great. And I really hope that lasts forever. A little part of me sort of thinking, well, in 5 years' time, that idea, that model of the collaboration, that's going to be well out of the window. I suppose we won't need to collaborate anymore. It'll just do everything that, we won't be required. I suppose the little, shard of exploded boat that I hold on to in this ocean of AI worries is what the AI doesn't have is intentionality. I was talking to someone the other day, and they were saying, "Oh yeah, but what AI doesn't have is creativity." Well, that's patently untrue. That's obviously untrue. It can create till the cows come home, but it doesn't have intentionality. I think that you probably need something like a soul to have intentionality. And I suppose, what that means in a tech context is like an entrepreneur. Like an entrepreneur has intentionality. They want to bring about a change in the world. To a lesser extent, designers, we want to bring about change in the world.
So you need unreasonable people.
Well, yeah. Well, I think we're all unreasonable. In spite of my placing a lot of value on reason, we're not at our core reasonable. We're at our core we're emotional. And sometimes we get to hold on to the reins of reason. But mostly, that's an emotional decision about when to do that.
Sorry, I'm being tricky. I guess there's that phrase which is, the reasonable man accepts the world as he finds it. The unreasonable person changes the world to meet their needs.
Yeah.
And it does seem to me that business people I hate the term entrepreneur personally. I think it's just such an overused, hackneyed expression. So yeah, forgive me, everyone. I'm allergic to it.
Sure.
But I do think that there are certain vectors of change, and I think the people who are advocates tend to be people in that problem space, be it trying to solve a business problem or trying to solve a user need.
Yes. In danger of disappearing up my own arse a little bit here, but there is a parallel to be made between a design concept and an unreason type of concept. So the unreason concept is imagination. So imagination isn't reason, right? But if you stand and look at a blank wall, something might come to mind. That your imagination is what's at play there, is what is acting when thoughts come, unbidden about things that could possibly happen. It's your imagination that comes into play when you get up and go to the fridge for a beer, right? You're imagining what it would be like to have the beer. So you enact a sequence of steps in order to bring about the new world in which you have a beer. That's imagination, and the design concept is the design space. So we have this space of possibilities. This is so pretentious. You got this space of possibilities, right? We could do it this way, or we could do it this way, and then in between, there's a bunch of other ways we could do it. And you can take any design is just one point in this space of possibilities, right? So yeah, design isn't an act of reason; it's an act of imagination. It's about thinking about what could be in the world, and then deciding to draw pictures and do other things that hopefully bring other people along for the ride and make it more likely that this state of the world will present itself to you. I'm well aware of how pretentious that sounds, but I do think there's something to it.
I'm looking at it, some of that.
You just cut the whole thing. So I've only just come up with that sort of idea like in the past few weeks, but
no, I don't disagree with it.
I think I really think it's true, but how much use there is in that to to your audience is a totally different question.
I think we've probably got quite a lot now, but I'll leave it with one final thing, right? Crystal ball time. What do you think are going to be the most interesting future possibilities and trends or emerging exciting stuff? What if you were betting that farm on something? What are you going to bet on when it comes to the world of UX in the next, midterm?
Cool. Well, like we're doing this conference at the moment, which is UX and AI. It's like what do UX practitioners need to know about AI? And I've been trying to map out that territory over the past year or so, trying to get my head around it because it's not an area that I'm an expert in. And so I've got this map, and it's super broad. It really feels like boiling the ocean. But nevertheless, we're going to try and get a speaker to cover an eighth. We get 8 speakers. We're each going to cover an eighth of this huge ocean. Well, it's naturally going to be broad, which means, unfortunately, it's going to be probably shallow as well. But I do think that's the way to go with the conference curation. And the reason is that I don't think there'll be any conference from now on that doesn't have a huge bit about AI. Just like there's no conference now that doesn't take it for granted that electricity is going to be deeply involved in our lives. Maybe we don't talk about electricity very much, but we talk about things that absolutely rely on it. AI is just like electricity. So I don't know. It's where my head's at the moment is, AI is really, really obviously a huge thing. I'm not exactly going out on a limb by observing that. But I think for the next few years, we're going to be really talking about how to incorporate AI into our workflows, into our products. We're going to be wrestling with questions of ethics that we are totally ill-equipped right now to wrestle with as, designers and researchers and managers and things. Like who got, who's been taught about ethics. So I think there's going to be a big interest in ethics. And that, again, I'm not exactly going out on a limb here. I'm more observing things that are happening now and saying, like, that quote of it's a hell of a cliche, but the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
And that wraps up our episode here on Big Softies. Thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to reach out about anything that we've covered in today's chat, or if you're just looking to connect, you can find me at Gavin Adam on LinkedIn. I'm always open to have discussions, take some feedback, or even just to have a quick hello. So please don't hesitate to reach out. This series has been hosted by Silicon Brighton, bringing together tech minds and creating opportunities for growth, learning, and connection. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform to stay updated of all of our latest episodes.